So let me welcome back to the stage, because you got to see her yesterday as well, Paula Vickers, who is Pro-Vice Chancellor and Director of IT at Middlesex University, and very kindly has come back after a 2-year absence to tell us what living in the elastic cloud is really like 2 years after she first went. Paula, over to you.
Hi. Well, I've got loads of slides. I'm really sorry. Loads of words on loads of slides. I don't intend to read them all out, but hopefully it will give you some reference points later when the slide deck's shared with you. So, for me, it was a logical choice. You heard Brunel talk earlier today. We moved into a hosted data center in 2002. We stayed in a hosted data center in 2009, but we added managed service. And we decided to stay in a hosted data center with managed service in 2015, but we didn't want to own the TIM. So what does it look like? Well, we have, how am I going to work this? How do I do that pointy bit? Okay, we have an Enfield data center, a data center in Arc, the one that weighs me when I go in, and our on-campus, it's not a data center. We've got a small equipment room for some AD and print locally, because actually those are the services that students really need to get quickly, and the bandwidth would be considerable otherwise. We connect to this data center at layer 3, and they have a layer 2 network. That doesn't really mean that much to me, but actually what it does, as I understand it, is give us the end-to-end visibility that we wanted for our server infrastructure. So what we wanted to be able to do is understand the workloads in the data center, and we have tooling that allows us to access that. And we can support things like Debian, Ubuntu, as well as Red Hat and Linux. Talked about a disaster recovery facility. And so, how do I pay? Well, what we did at the beginning of the contract is make a guess. It was an educated guess, based on the servers that we had before. We were pretty much 99% virtualized. And we knew what capacity they were using. And so we decided to work with a supplier and establish a baseline. And if I go below that baseline, in terms of the resource usage, I get no money back. If I go above that baseline, I have to start paying. And I have a choice of what I pay. I can decide to just pay per day, which is the per month, or I could do it on a 12-month basis, and I could do it on a 60-month basis. Clearly, the longer I commit to that resource usage, the cheaper the price becomes. And you can see right now that we contracted at 603 CPU, but at the moment slightly under that. And you can see the figures for the others. So I'm not paying per server, I'm paying for CPU storage and memory. So I can have as many servers as I like. Now, we were already in a data center, a supplier data center, and we needed to move to this new data center. So there was a big project at the start in 2015-16 to move us. It took about a year, and we did employ a project manager to do it, but other than that, it was our internal staff and the supplier staff working with us. And what you can see is actually the server migration sort of really took from February to July. And we had an absolute hard stop because we had to get out of the other data center before IBM started charging us for future months and years, which starts to get expensive. So we achieved that within that time. One of the things that, if you're ever in that position of moving between data centers, one of the things I'd call out there is the tipping point for the MIS firewall. Because at one point, when you start, all your systems are in one data center. But at some point, the load is all in the other place. But your MIS firewall may not be. And actually, we had to consider really carefully at which point you move things like your firewall. Because you don't want it, we called it tromboning. You don't want it to have to come into the new production data center and go, oh, the system's not here, the firewall's not here. Go all the way back through the network to the old production data center and go, okay, I found the firewall, but the data's not here, so now I need to go all the way back to the other data center. So there is a tipping point when you're moving between data centers that you need to consider really carefully with regard to things like your firewall. So what did the migration look like in more detail? For each server, there was a plan. The plan looked pretty much like this. And it required us to do some pre-tests, switch the agents off on ones from, so we had 2 managed services, so we switched off the IBM agents, and then we applied the new supplier agents, and then once we thought they were all nicely settled, we shifted the server using a technology called Zerto, and it kept all the IP numbering the same, and that was fantastic, except for the time when we forgot to switch some of the agents off, so we found that IBM were patching servers that were in the Expo E data center. So it's really important to actually really understand your migration path. And what you can see up here is that we try to be quite careful in the way that we considered moving the servers. We didn't really want to make it all the student systems on one day so that everybody had loads of work to do. So we tried to balance them out between infrastructural servers like DNS and other servers such as MIS systems or school servers. The other thing that we did was these things. And the ones I'd call out to you are things like replacing the MIS firewall, replacing data center switching, and load balancing. It's really difficult for those systems to be in 2 places at once. So actually it really helped us that we were in a position to buy new stuff to go in the new data center and leave the old stuff behind, as it were. Because you need that infrastructure in both places at one time, and we still own the network. So if you go back to that original diagram, anything that was in blue we own, we still manage that network. So what's it like to live there? Well, that's my resource usage. So I showed you my baseline, and I told you that I was underusing some of the resource. What we've learned by looking at some of the reports that we get is that VMware will allow you to add and take away CPU and memory by just taking the system down, applying the new resource, switching the system back up. It's really easy, really fast. You can probably do it in your on-premise infrastructure if you ever cared to do it. But if you want to remove storage, you have to rebuild the system, which is a bit of a bugger. And actually, what you find is, historically, your DBAs may have gone, oh, that system needs quite a lot of storage. They may never have been using it, but they like hoarding. Okay, and if you take a hoarding mentality into a contract like this, you find you're over-provisioned. And what's the point when you can call it off in as much as 5 minutes? What is the point in over-provisioning your infrastructure? So we're learning that, sadly, let me just show you, sadly, we're a little bit over-provisioned on tier 1 storage, but I can't get that 36 gig back unless I rebuild the box, and frankly, it's not worth it. But the CPU and memory, actually, if I look at those reports, I can go, you know what? Not all of those servers needed all of that stuff we guessed at the beginning. If I take it down, actually, I can reduce some of my costs. You know, that overuse of memory, if I can take down by 188 gig, then actually, I'm sort of level and I'm not paying any overage. But I've just talked about the data center, and actually, so much isn't there. Our policy is cloud first. It's not to put it in our data center. It is to try and find it as a service if it's appropriate. And clearly, you can see that IDC and Gartner see those trends, and they're recognizing them. And I think listening to the conference this last 2 days, you can see many universities are recognizing the trend to move out of data centers. There really is not that much benefit, unless you already have one and it's just been invested in keeping it. But so much of what we have, if I could ever find the button that shows the pointy thing, so much of what we have is not there. So if you look at what's in our actual data center compared to what's not in our data center, it's really significant. So we wanted it highly available, and it is. There's a lot of green up there. There's a bit of red. So what was the error? An engineer error. It's a bit embarrassing. It caused us a lot of trouble. The engineer thought they were decommissioning an old SAN. They pulled out all the SAN fabric for this production SAN. It was not very good, but it did test incident management procedures. And the other one was actually this one in orange, 99.9%. When you buy into a shared infrastructure, you have to actually understand that sometimes your supplier might need to do stuff that may not be directly benefiting you. So in this instance, they had done some upgrade work, and actually it was having a really strange effect on some other customers, but we're all sharing that thing. So they had to take the systems down in order to fix what was going on there. So if you're going to buy into a shared resource, whether it be Azure, whether it be AWS, or whether it be private cloud, as this is, you really have to acknowledge that it's not all dedicated to you, and sometimes you have to work for the better good of the supplier and their other customers, not just you. And that sometimes sticks in the throat, but you can see that actually it's a really good picture. You know, the systems are extremely reliable, but it does mean that they need to road test the incident management. And when you're going in, you need to understand your recovery order. So when they bring the systems down, I've got this lovely 24/7 managed service. I would quite like, when I'm lying in bed and it goes down, for them to go, okay, I know the recovery order of the systems. I can start bringing them all up. I can start testing them. They're all fine. I don't need to get Paula out of bed just now. But if I've not shared with them the recovery order, then they can't support us through incident management in the way that we need. Responsive. It's been really responsive, and the only reason we've missed SLA is because my staff kept recording changes as incidents, and they're not. So once we got that sorted out, it's been a lovely picture of green, but I couldn't be bothered to show you that. One of the things I think you might want to think about is if you were to go into a contract like this, when somebody offers you service credits, they usually offer you service credits around this availability. They don't often offer you service credits around their performance at the help desk. And that actually what you really want is, servers don't really break that much, and the infrastructure doesn't break that much, but what you want is a really responsive help desk. You want, when you're in a problem with a P1 call, you want them responding, and you want them responding within a given time. So it's worth looking at your contract and trying to make sure that you get the responsiveness you want. When we went into this contract, we said we want it patched. But as a token gesture to researchers, we allowed ourselves to have bare metal. But what we've learned is that that really isn't flying in a GDPR world. But our servers are now patched monthly. Our management information systems are patched 3 times a year, simply because that's as much disruption as the user body can take. And we've agreed the least disruptive cycle. So we do dev before UAT, before live. And we make sure that all vulnerabilities with a CVS score of 7 or more are done within 1 month. So it's looking really healthy, and it's in a really good place. Recovery, we use Zerto. Zerto is the technology we did the lift and shift migration, but it's also what allows us to spin the systems back up if there were a problem. One of the things that we've learned is, if you end up with ransomware, you want to switch your Zerto off, because you don't want that replicating. So you've got a short moment where you have to keep your cool and think, right, I don't want that stuff in there. I shall switch that off before it gets there. Oversight and management. So we have a managed service. I get a service manager, and I get monthly reports, and I get visibility of the workloads through a variety of tools. So we can log into those systems. We can see how they're performing. We do have the tools that those engineers work with. And that gives us the assurance that the systems are doing what we wanted them to do. One of the things that we do also ask for is a technical architect 1 day a month. Because actually stuff changes, new things come along, and it's really nice as part of the program to have that capability. And my phone's just decided to switch itself off, so I have no idea how long I've been gabbling. So it's given us greater agility. We're really much more responsive. We can pull off servers within a day, half a day. If it were really pressed, 20 minutes. It's got to go through a change control procedure. but it has allowed us to be much more responsive to new requirements. But not only that, they know us, they know our infrastructure really deeply, and therefore they can help us when we end up with other pieces of shit that are happening, which happen every day in a university. So when your firewall ends up with a problem, or your security manager leaves and you have no one to look after your firewall, or when you have some sort of incident management, they have been fantastic. But they've been able to do that because they have a daily working knowledge of our environment. And so it is built on the shared understanding. And I call out the joint configuration management database, because if they don't have that same shared understanding, if they don't know your recovery order, they don't know what that system is doing, it doesn't help them be responsive. So you have to make sure that all that documentation is aligned. But for operational practices, that CMDB is really essential. So what have I learned? Well, I sort of knew this anyway, but it's about seeing the wood for the trees at the point that you're negotiating that contract. Many suppliers don't see IIS, DNS, and SQL Server as part of an infrastructure platform. So when they're doing patching, they don't see that that's their problem. But we think that that is their problem. So are we clear? You know, as you're trying to wade through this, you can do this and we'll do that. You need to make sure that you're really clear about what things you want in that contract, and I just offer that up as an example of some of the things. You still need internal technical knowledge. This complicated diagram actually describes how we thought the data center was connecting at layer 2, layer 3, and how it was actually connecting. We still needed staff on my side to specify the contract, to work with the supplier on a regular basis. It isn't an opportunity to say, oh, I don't need any technical staff anymore. I do, but I want to release them to do more interesting things as well. One of the things I wanted was to have cheaper development. We seem to keep our systems always on. In fact, if you look, the old CP, you know, in terms of the usage, you could see my production systems last time, 66% were dedicated, of the CPU was dedicated to production and 34% to development. I've managed to reduce the amount given over to development at any one time. But my nirvana of just switching them on when I wanted them and switching them off the rest of the time hasn't happened. And it's not because the supplier hasn't made that possible. It's because our internal processes keep demanding that we have these development environments always on, always doing something. And actually it's really quite expensive. And I think it's because we haven't got across to the users that they don't have to have these security blankets always switched on. You can agilely bring them up and take them down again. And the other thing that we've made quite good use of is snapshotting. So if you're doing an upgrade, we do a snapshot before you do the upgrade. And that's been really fantastic. Don't own the hardware. I so don't get why you think you need to do it. And also, if possible, stop the supplier giving you dedicated hardware. They gave us dedicated hardware for some local service, AD and print, for SIEM, and for backup. The local service for AD and print now don't quite have enough space in them, so we had to find some extra bloody space. So I'm left with the 3 servers I have, still needed some extra stuff, which is absolutely what I was trying to get away from. We decided the SIEM package was a bit rubbish, but what could we do with the hardware? We wanted suddenly to get rid of it. So every time when I've had dedicated hardware given to me by the supplier, it's been the thing that I've gone, oh, I don't really want that, because I now want to do something different. There are some times when I think you do need some. If you're HPC and we don't have any high-performance compute, or not any that I manage, then actually I don't think that that is so suitable to put out in the supplier's data center following the model that we've got. It might be that you could find another appropriate model. So, yes, it's all good. Brings me to another topic that I've really learned this last year about security management. We are very different from your usual company in a data center. I've talked about bare metal. And like I said, we had this idea that it would be great that researchers could have bare metal, but now actually everything needs patching, because I don't know any research project that doesn't think that their data needs to be properly secured. We've actually started switching AV on for Linux weekly. Now, loads of Linux boffins will tell you that it doesn't need it. They don't get viruses. I can tell you they do sometimes. And it's quite useful having it switched on once a week. And clearly you all probably know this, but moving away from signature-based AV to anomaly-based AV is where we need to be. But the other thing is, you know when you went out to tender and you said, I want it ISO or Cyber Essentials certified? I ask you this, which bit is ISO or 27000 certified? Well, I can tell you, it's that bit there. Okay? It's the bit the supplier has in their data center that's theirs, that they don't put your shit on. Excuse my language. This bit is debatable. Okay, so when we got this contract, we chose an ISO 27001 supplier. And that sounded lovely until you realize you don't inherit it. So the stuff where, this bit here, where they've provided us an infrastructure, but actually they're still managing that. So it's like the box that all the servers sit on. They weren't vulnerability managing that. That wasn't their bit. They were vulnerability managing this. But this bit they consider to be ours and outside their scope for ISO. And this bit definitely was. So it's really important as you go into these contracts to know which bit that you get and whether they will certify the pieces that you think should be covered. And vulnerability management, they weren't doing that at the beginning. In 2015, it really wasn't the major issue it is now. But now they are scanning, well, we are scanning the whole lot. We scan their servers and we say, oh, you fix this. So we're scanning this bit and this bit. That's not my responsibility, but we're scanning that. And it's really important that you understand that, not just for data center contracts like this, but also for software as a service contracts. You really need to know that the vulnerability management is being done, because if they just do it annually, I can tell you as somebody who does it weekly, new stuff comes out week on week. Affordable. Well, it has proved affordable to us. I dare say if you just bought me a piece of tin here, it would be cheaper to have the piece of tin here, just if you just considered the machine. But in terms of the entire service, actually, I think that there's value for money in these sorts of services. My previous contract, I managed to achieve the startup costs and the 5-year run costs in the same cost as it took me just for the 5-year run. So every year I expect this to get cheaper. So I think it's affordable. Benchmarking. When I benchmark myself against somebody else, they might talk about headcount. Well, I've got 51 staff in my service, including me. But I'm not counting my managed service supplier. But you probably are counting your people who are looking after your data centers and your servers. But the benchmark is different. If I look at just my annual revenue costs, that's different too, because you've got a whole load of stuff stuck in capital and I don't. So I do think that those people, including UCISA, who are thinking about benchmarks, need to think about the new benchmarks for these new worlds. And we need to be really honest. That's what my parting shots really are. The data. It's talked about where your data is. I've shown you that more of my data is outside my data center than is in. Middlesex has, let me just do this bit, this might help. No, it doesn't want to do anything. Yes, we have campuses at Dubai, Mauritius and Malta, as well as London. And we have got providers, as a service providers in all the rest of the country. And we have got partners in other locations. So that means my data is accessed in a variety of different places. I have no idea what staff development is done for those people. I have no idea what their data management processes are. And in the whole GDPR world, that is really concerning. And I think that what we need to do as a community is stop worrying about our data centres, although they are important. But I think we can put them in the hands of people who can look after them for us. I think what's really important for us is to actually start focusing on where the data is. And that means that things like your CMDB need not only to include the servers that you manage directly, but you have to understand what all of those as-a-service suppliers have got. Are they on Linux platforms or Windows platforms? Because if they were on a Windows platform, when WannaCry came out, you wanted to contact them and go, "Oi, are you okay for this? Is this going to be a problem?" You want to know what data retention policies they have. So your CMD has to be about all the data, not just a partial set of the data that you historically have stuck in your data center. And as a patch and vulnerability management are no longer optional. And this website here, the government website, is really quite interesting. It's a set of documentation and a questionnaire that you can give suppliers and go, "Are you compliant with all these things?" So it asks some questions about, the ISO credentials and where the data's held and what's the vetting and all the rest of it. So before you go and invent a whole set of questions to ask your suppliers, that's quite good to look at as a first base. So in summary, from my perspective, we're working with a partner that's got a detailed understanding of our environment. We're better positioned to meet emerging technical challenges because I'm not so bowed under by the workload associated with patching and managing data centers. We are providing a better service at a lower cost. We've included many more servers within this contract, and our price is much lower. And we are more compliant and ultimately more agile. The other day, my student system needed a bit more storage. It had fallen over, not storage, memory. It had fallen over. And within 5 minutes, we had chucked 32 gig at it, and it was up and running. We still think that there might be an Oracle underlying issue, but it's running. And because we could chuck 5 minutes, within 5 minutes, that memory at it. So it's really important that you get that agility, because actually, ultimately, none of this matters to anybody but us. The universities just expected all of that to be operational, humming, working. They have no understanding of the complexities that we deal with day on day out, and they couldn't care less. They want us to be agile. They want us to be developing the new app and making sure we're GDPR compliant, because they know there's a big fine there. So for me, this has helped. It may not be your desired end goal, but I suspect for those who have put their servers in those Infinity data centers, the next step will be, why do I have to patch it? Why do I have to manage it? And then I suggest that you need to sort of look at some of the learnings here, because I think some of them are relevant to the wider audience when you get to that point. Anyway, thank you.
Paula, that was great, thank you. And I think there was lots and lots of really, really useful information there for anybody who's already in the cloud, planning to go to the cloud. I think we've got a really good tick list there of things we need to watch out for. Has anybody got any questions for Paula, or has she done a completely sterling job and just told us everything?
No, the sterling job comes next. I've seen the exciting slides that come after me.
No? Well, in that case, thank you once again, Paula, for coming and talking to us.